So, but you know, today is our Pearl Harbor Day, and let me. My name is Elaine Ryder. I'm a docent here at the Historical Society. I'm a past trustee. I'm a past house manager here too. So let me tell you first how this happened, how this came about. I was having lunch with Joan Laura and Betty Gano, and we were just talking, and I happened to say to them, "Where were you on Pearl Harbor Day?" Now this is back in the spring. And from the next 2 hours, I heard all this wonderful, well, sad, but wonderful history about Pearl Harbor Day and things about the war that I didn't know. So, and even though I'm a war baby, my father was fought in World War II in the Italian campaign. He was a Purple Heart awarded Purple Heart in 3 Oak Leaf clusters. And so I was raised with war stories, but not the personal stories of what went on here in America, because he wasn't here at that time. He was fighting the war. So thank you, Joan, for that. And so what I did was we sent out the letters, trying to get all these different stories. So that's our mission today, is to get your personal story and your emotions, things that happened with your family. And then some of you were young, some of you, well, you were all young at that time. So anybody that has any memories, and some of you have memories of what your parents said to you. So anyhow, I'm going to start, and Harold Ryther over here is, and his wife is the chairman for the fund for the USS Oklahoma Remains Project, to bring the boys' remains home since what, 1941, right, when the Oklahoma capsized and was sunk. And that. So, but they have to leave early. So we'll go around the room. Why don't I just tell you who this is? Gail Paxson, and he was in the insert for the Morning Journal. I don't know that it was in the Salem News, but I did bring it. It's over there. And then this is his daughter, and this is Don Santee, and this is Donald Stapleton, and this is Lou Raymond right here, and this is Barb Yonkers, and this is Joan Laura, Nina Whistler, Harold Ryther, Mary Ann Ryther, Jean Ellis Fair, and this is somebody who just came today and has some pictures, I hope, of the USS Oklahoma for you, Harold. We'll be able to scan them in, and he had seen the display, came into the gift shop there, seen the display, and his uncle was a diver for the USS Oklahoma to go down and bring back the remains. So I thought you would be interested in that.
Interesting.
Yeah, so anyhow, so we're just going to start here with Gail, and I want you to just tell me what you told me when I visited you, and I asked you, where were you when it came on the radio, and I'm going to have you talk into this.
Okay, Norm Weingart and I were good friends, and he fixed me up with a blind date that afternoon, Sunday afternoon. So I picked Norm up and his girlfriend, and we went and picked my blind date up, and we started driving around approximately 1 o'clock Sunday afternoon. And then Norm says, "Gail, get some music on that radio." Okay, so I turned the radio on, and all I could hear was that chatter about Pearl Harbor being bombed. Oh, I said to Norm, "Where in the heck is Pearl Harbor?" He said, "Someplace out in the Pacific, I think." Well, a year and a half later, I found out where it was 3 or 4 times. I was on the USS New York battleship, and that was our home port when it was in the Pacific. That's about it.
That's that one, okay. And we'll come back, because you're going to remember other stuff too. So this is Don Santee.
Thank you. Well, my story is kind of funny. I'm from Sebring originally, was born there and lived there and until I was older, but we lived in New Mexico 3 different times. But when I was 12 years old, my mom and dad, and I only had one sister, was eating dinner, and my uncle and aunt came to the house and told us that Pearl Harbor had been bombed. Well, all of you probably remember, most everybody in those days had a coal-fired furnace. And anyway, we had a section of the cellar that all of the coal would be put in there to shovel into the furnace to keep us warm. All of a sudden, we were listening to Roosevelt speak on the radio, and this coal fell and made a rumbling noise. And nobody knew what it was, but we all thought it was being bombed. and oh boy, my sister ran over to my dad and hugged him, and she was scared. And so anyway, that was my Pearl Harbor story. Thank you for listening.
I believe I was 9 years old. I was with my dad and mom, and he was visiting his sister in Lisbon, Ohio. It was a Shaw family, and they lived off the Lincoln Highway. And I had 4 girl cousins at the time, and we were playing out in the yard, and it was a nice day. As I remember, it wasn't snowing, and it was a day like today, I would imagine. And they came out of the house, my dad and mom, and said that the Japanese had bombed Pearl Harbor. And of course, I wasn't familiar with where it was, but in later years I visited Pearl. But anyhow, getting back to the original, my family visited the Shaw family. They lived off the Lincoln Highway in Lisbon, Ohio, and they came out and said that Pearl Harbor had been bombed, and it really, I guess, I didn't really know where it was at, but I was quite disturbed at 9 years old, and that's my story.
Were your parents disturbed too?
Were they what?
Were your parents upset too?
Oh, everybody was upset. I mean, my aunt and uncle and my dad and mom, and we just couldn't believe it.
Couldn't believe it.
Okay, Louis.
It was a terrible day. It frightened me very much. And I was very young. I go back to when the crust of the earth was cooling off. I was very, very young. And I got on the radio when I heard about it immediately and heard the President of the United States say, "This is a day of infamy."
Is there any way you can get to her?
And it was a very serious day. And it's one that I don't like to celebrate, but it's something we should remember, because it was so uncalled for and we weren't prepared for it. We lost a lot of young men, our ships. It was destructive and horrible. And I can't celebrate this day because it was one of the most difficult and tragic days in the history of our country, and it's not a good memory of mine. It was terrible. And then was the proclamation of war against Japan, and I heard the president say that. And we weren't really prepared for a war, but it came on us so quickly, so suddenly, where there was no planning necessary. But then somewhat later, when the bomb was dropped in Japan to save American lives, there was only one thing that kept going through my mind. I understood why we dropped that, to finish that war, and it worked. But there was one thing that kept going through my mind. Someday, I wonder if we will regret that. I'll think about today. Think about North Korea. think about the countries who have this horrible bombing. So I can't celebrate it.
Where
know it had-
were you, Lou? Where were you? You at home?
I was at home.
You were at home.
And I accidentally got on the radio and heard the president. And then he went on to explain it all and to declare war.
Yeah, okay.
So it's not a celebration for me,
Okay.
nor a very pleasant memory. And and today, if you get a Salem paper, there's a wonderful article, wonderful article, and it just goes into how many young men were killed, how many ships were destroyed. What is there to celebrate about that? Remember? Yes. Learn from it? Yes. But celebrate it? No, thank you.
Pass it down.
Yeah, Barb, I'm going to skip you and go to Harold, and
I wasn't
Marianne.
born yet, that's why.
Congratulations.
Because
We have to wait
Harold
2.5
Ryder.
years till I can enter in.
It's our pleasure to be here. I'm going to have my wife remember her time at Pearl Harbor when she was young, and the reason is because of her uncle. And very briefly, when the Oklahoma sank, it interned 388 sailors, of which 14 were Marines, and they were, in 1943, were buried in the Punch Bowl in 46 unmarked graves containing 61 coffins containing 388 bodies, one of which would be her uncle. In 2010, they contacted us for her DNA because they were going to exhume these graves and identify them through DNA and send them home. Over the next 3 years, they started and stopped. And in 2014, we decided to create the USS Oklahoma Remains Preservation Project to make sure that the government does this. We think we've been successful in making them do it. They have, as of a Vindicator article just last week, they have now identified 100 and are proceeding. So this project is ongoing, and there's still almost 300 yet to identify and get home. But these bodies were on U.S. soil listed as MIAs for 75 years. And this is what we were pushing to make sure that the government did their job. And this is my wife, Marianne.
Again, thank you for having us. Briefly, I'll tell you why I am so interested in this. I lived and was raised by my grandparents. So I was there when they found out that the Oklahoma, or when World War II started, Pearl Harbor. The one thing, my grandparents didn't throw away anything. I have the telegram. It was a handwritten telegram that was sent out right after the Oklahoma was hit. And it was handwritten by the Rear Admiral Randall Jacobs. And this telegram, of course, back then, it came through the post office. But the telegram says that their son was missing in action. That's all they knew. Then I have the telegram that they received on February 14th, 1942, that said that their son, Stanislaw Frank Derwall, pattern maker, first class, U.S. Navy, has therefore been actually declared to have lost his life. This, and it was signed, the telegram was signed by my grandmother. But why do I remember this? as I said, I lived with my grandparents. I was 4 years old. And the day that this came in, we lived in a small town in West Virginia, coal mining town. We didn't have bathrooms or anything else like that. You took your bath in a bathtub, a round bathtub. And it was on a day that my grandmother was giving me a bath. And it was cold outside, and we were by the coal stove where I got my bath. And I can remember the person that came to the door, and I can remember my grandmother sitting next to me, next to the tub, holding this piece of paper. Of course, I was 4 years old. I had no idea what this paper was, but it was a telegram. And the reason why I remember that particular time is because my grandmother was crying.
It's hard.
Anyhow,
It's hard.
I can really picture that as if it were yesterday, because my grandmother was hurting. The other things that I have here the last letter, and it's dated from the USS Oklahoma. It's dated December 5th, 1941, to my uncle, sent to his family. And in this letter, he sent money home for my grandparents to buy everybody a present for Christmas. And in the very last sentence, it says, make sure you buy a present for Mary Ann and tell her it's from Uncle Santa. And that was Les' last letter that he sent to his parents. He died on December 7th on the Oklahoma. But I've known about this all of my life. And when all this started is the reason why I'm still interested. I want all of those men who died on the Oklahoma to be brought home and given to their families. Hopefully my uncle will be one of them, but if not, that's whatever. I'm sorry,
Okay.
it's hard for me to talk about. Thank you for
It's
having
okay.
us.
Okay. You want to go back to Nina?
That is so interesting, and it is so sad. Had just turned 9 years old, and it was a Sunday afternoon. We were in the living room, the radio was on, and so we first heard it, that the Japanese had attacked. And my oldest brother was a junior in high school then, and then he went into the Navy after he was out of high school. And the reason why there were Marines on that ship is because the Marines did not have their own medical corps. They transferred men from the Navy to the Marines to cover the medicals. And my brother Frank was in the Navy, and he was a medical corpsman, and he did serve it as well in the Marines too. But it was just something that you never forget when you first hear this on the radio, that the Japanese had attacked. That's all.
I apologize.
Thank you for coming. It's so wonderful that you have these things.
And
You know,
at
and
Kent State
they have been
University
saved.
in
Well, the other thing
Rumble
too
campus.
One at a
And
time, talk. I can't hear
one
you.
other thing to remember, one other thing why this is so important to me. On December 7th, my uncle was lost, my grandmother's oldest son. 1.5 years, 1 year later, she lost a second son in the Navy. And his ship was also sunk. So we do have more, you know, a lot to remember, and I do remember all this stuff, so.
Thank you for coming and sharing that story.
Apologize, we do have to leave. We have another exhibit at Kent State University
It's all right, we
that we need to
understand.
get to. So we'll pack up. And you had some pictures that we want to get together later sometime.
Okay. You can talk to
Just
us later.
get Elaine,
Yep.
and we'd be really happy to do that. Thank you again.
Thank you.
Thank you for coming.
Thank you all for your sharing that with us. I enjoyed it.
I'll get that stuff.
I got something I had that, like I say, my home port,
Thank you.
Pearl Harbor, and every time every time we'd go into port, if you was topside and you passed the Arizona, you saluted. And that happened 3 or 4 times.
And Frank was in Hawaii.
My engagement was Iwo Jima. And the funny part about it, when we left Pearl Harbor for Iwo Jima, we lost a blade off of our port screw. We had 2 propellers or screws, 18 foot in diameter. We lost a blade off. So Admiral Halsey told us, go into Iwo, empty all your main battery ammunition, save your anti-aircraft shells, which we did. And we unloaded, I think it was over 1,000 rounds of 14-inch shells into Iwo Jima. Blew up a big ammunition dump that the Japanese had. We were only there for 3 days because of our problem with our port screw. So we got orders to go down to, I think it was Manus, a big floating dry dock, to go in to have this screw repaired. And on the way down there, we lost the blade off the starboard screw. So there we was chugging along at approximately 4 knots to go over 2,000 miles. And our escorts would circle us to protect us from submarines. And we finally got down there and went in the floating dry dock. And the way that works, they sink the floating dry dock, the battleship goes in, and then they pump the water out of the floating dry dock, raises the battleship up out of the water. And when we got there, believe it or not, they had both propellers waiting for us, and they put them on. And we left there for Okinawa. And we was at Okinawa for 79 days bombarding. And also, we got, I don't know whether you people remember Bill Butler, but he was in the Navy, flew off of carriers. And when we get together after the war was over, well, to get back to the story, we got word there was 300 Jap planes coming off the mainland of Japan down. And I told Bill, the sad part about it, you guys only shot down 250, and you let 50 of them get through to where we were. And we always told that story. But anyhow, they survived, and but when we left Okinawa to go back to Pearl Harbor, to get all our Marine battery 14-inch guns were condemned. They were fired so much. So when we got back to Pearl Harbor, they had new guns on the dock waiting for us. So they started tearing the gun turrets apart, taking the old guns out. And all at once they stopped. Well, what the heck's going on? So finally they started putting the old guns back on. Well, what the heck they doing? They started closing up the gun turrets. That's when the atomic bomb was dropped. They knew it was over.
Yeah.
Not a lot of people frown on that, but it saved also a lot of lives.
Best thing that ever happened.
So, end the story.
That's good to know.
That's really
That's good to
interesting.
know. Are you ready, John?
Good story. That's nice of you to tell me.
Yeah.
That's nice.
Yeah.
Thank
Good
you for
ending
your
to that.
service. I
Yeah.
was in the Korean War.
Wow.
Well, I was in 7th grade on December 7th, Sunday afternoon, and I was walking home out South Lincoln after a movie with my girlfriends. When I got home, my parents were listening to the radio, and they told us about the attack. It certainly changed things in Salem. I can tell you, I was also a Girl Scout at that time, and we went door to door collecting newspapers, catalogs, and magazines for the war effort. We collected tin cans. They had to have the label torn off, and I can remember my mother crushing them with her foot. And we had rationing, which didn't hurt any of us because we were helping for the war effort. My brother was in the Air Corps. They called it Air Corps then. He enlisted his senior year in high school. At Christmas, but they allowed him to finish and graduate in June, and he left the next week for the Air Corps. He served then, and then he was recalled again for Korea. And it's a horrible thing, but people did pull together. Everybody had a victory card, and I remember that. And war was bad.
All right, then we have to get, when you're done with dinner. let's just
no,
I
get
can wait.
Alice. Go ahead.
Want me to wait? I was going to be born 2.5 years after Pearl Harbor, but my father was there, and he wrote pages and pages about it. And I have a quote from the Salem News, December of 1981, and Pearl Harbor attack canceled discharge. The sergeant turned his gear in on Friday, December 5th, 1941, and was scheduled to ship out on Saturday. He was leaving the Army and would be home before New Year's, but the captain of his transport ship decided to lay over until Monday so the crew could enjoy a weekend in Honolulu. Sergeant Donald L. Murdoch would not return home again until July of 1945. He was in the Army Corps of Engineers. This picture was when he was a lieutenant, but when he was at Pearl Harbor, he was a master sergeant. But of course, he raised through the ranks quickly during the war. And I brought something.
While she's doing that, we had the Ravenna Arsenal. Do we not have the Ravenna Arsenal around here? So we have up in our Pierce house here, we have a great aunt of mine that was in World War I, a heroine in Romania that took and when she was 65, here in Salem, she worked at the Ravenna Arsenal. So she was patriotic then, patriotic now, and we even have pictures of her with her lunch bucket and her babushka and everything, and her working at the, making ammunition at the Ravenna Arsenal. So that's good. So Barb brought some paraphernalia, some artifacts.
Yeah, this was, there have been a lot of, I don't want to say celebrations, because it's not a celebration of December 7th. It's a commemoration.
Yeah.
But there have been a lot of commemorations here in Salem and up in Cleveland, where my dad grew up. So at some point, he must have bought a jacket, because in going through his things, I just couldn't part with this jacket.
Yeah.
I sort of would like to wear it sometime and have somebody say, gee, you don't look that old. This is his dress uniform, Army Corps of Engineers, and at this point he was a major, and I think he finished out the Army as a major. But he was, they were building airstrips to defend Pearl Harbor, the Army Corps of Engineers, and he was about 18 miles away on a mountaintop building a strip, and they could see the planes coming in. And my mom and he were not married yet. They didn't get married till 1942. It said he didn't return to home until 1945, but he was returned to the West Coast, where they became firefighters in Boise, Idaho, and Spokane, Washington, and served out his Army time there. He had just turned 28, coming up to December 7th, and there was a 28-year-old rule that if you stood in good standing, if you were in good standing, you could be discharged. You would no longer have to serve. So he was ready to be discharged, and then of course that all changed with the bombing. Although my mom, at the time not married yet, and his folks and my mother's folks all knew he was at Pearl Harbor. I didn't think to bring letters, but letters that would come home were so highly what's that word? Dave, what's that word for
Censored.
censored? So highly censored, so it'd be like, we went big blacks, like, I didn't even know they had permanent magic markers back then, but that's what it looks like, big black tar lines across. So, but they did figure out that he was at Pearl Harbor. While he was there, he claims, now my dad told stories, he claims this was a piece of the first Japanese plane shot down at Pearl Harbor. It's a piece of a Japanese plane, but whether it was the first one, God only knows. But he died thinking that, or saying that anyway. So that was something that we've kept in the family. And in these notes about the war, these are notes about his whole life. But anyway, particularly about the war, something that I pulled out in reading them, of course the black windows that were painted in the black, like you read it, and all the novels that are coming out now, or in the last several years, about World War II. And I think there are so many novels being written about that war now, because so many of the people that served are no longer living, and they can't contradict anything that's being said. That's just my viewpoint. But anyway, there's a lot of them take place in France, and they're about the people that worked in the resistance and in whatever. I think they're very interesting. They're historic novels. They're not necessarily accurate, but. The first Victory Gardens, butter and sugar being just practically non-existent, as you all know. Nylon hose could no longer be purchased, and saving stamps to make our country great again, which we've been hearing recently, but that was the theme, to buy saving stamps to make our country great again, were sold in elementary schools. So I thought that was interesting. And a movie that my dad recommended that was about Pearl Harbor is Mrs. Miniver, and just thought I'd recommend that. So Thanks. Thanks for inviting me, by the way.
Alice? Jean Alice.
It's your turn,
I was- Thank you. I was a very happy and 14-year-old when Pearl Harbor came, and I was walking to my friend's house to spend Sunday afternoon with her, and when I got there, they opened the door and said, "Have you heard about Pearl Harbor?" I didn't have any idea where Pearl Harbor was, but we soon learned, and the next few years were nothing but the war. My uncle went to war, he enlisted, and although he came home, he never was the same happy uncle I had remembered pre-war. I had, in my senior year of high school, we had some of the boys volunteered to go into the service. If you were there for the first semester and did a passing grade, you were free to enlist and you would be given credit for your second semester. I had two friends who enlisted. One of them was killed at Okinawa in the Marines, and the other one died on D-Day in Europe, on Normandy. So it touched our house through my uncle, who was never well after he left the war, and it sort of cast a shadow having two friends killed who were about 19 at the time was equally as hard on our family, because one of the boys was played basketball at our house just about every day. So I have those warm memories of them before that time.
No, that's okay. So go ahead, you can say, tell us about your uncle.
Well, my name is Farber Tinsley, and excuse me a minute.
His name is Farber Tinsley. Okay.
My uncle was also Farber Tinsley. He grew up in Lake Milton, and he was an excellent swimmer, being grown up by the lake up there. He was in the Navy in San Francisco at the time of Pearl Harbor, and he was a diver. And eventually he was sent to Pearl Harbor, and I have several pictures I know you can't see, but he was in salvage up there on the Oklahoma, who people were here. For several years, I don't know exactly how long, but quite a while. And he was also in Alaska salvaging or repairing ships up there that had been hit by the Japanese planes. He later years lived in California and worked in construction on dams, where they would be building a dam in the river and he would dive down and work on those. But that's basically my story. It's not my story, it's his story. But Elaine asked me to come down and show some of the pictures I have here. You're welcome to look at them if you'd like. But they were pretty interesting. He sent them to us, probably when I was like 14, 15 years old. And I didn't really know him very well because, like I said, they lived in California. And I maybe only saw him 3 or 4 times in my lifetime, because at that point, people didn't travel across the country like they do now.
You look like a Laughlin. When you said your name.
Yeah.
I talked to Kirby the other day.
Yeah. Well, this is my dad's brother, so it'd be the other side of the family, but I am Lachlan.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, Jimmy.
But that's basically what I have here is she wanted to take a look at the pictures and see what he did during the war.
Boy, it amazed me when I met Harold Ryther and learned all about the USS Oklahoma. I mean, I'm ignorant to that, here I am raised with war stories, and I'm ignorant to that, but how the divers went down and cut holes in the ship and pulled body parts out. And in those days, I didn't realize we didn't have dog tags because we weren't at war. So all those people, all those guys that were, lost their lives in Pearl Harbor were not identified. So because, I mean, it would hard be hard now. So his project, her project is really a good project,
I think
with the
Roosevelt
DNA.
declared war on Monday.
I'm sorry, what?
They declared war on Monday, following the Sunday. Roosevelt was...
So it was Sunday and then declared war?
The next day was Monday, and they declared war on
And then was
Monday.
everybody issued, were you issued dog tags?
Pardon?
Did you get dog tags? Did they give you guys
Yeah, I
dog
had
tags?
dog tags.
Yeah.
Man, I always wondered what I did with them. I can't find them.
Okay.
I don't know whether people realize that today oil is seeping out of Arizona
Right, you can see it.
still today.
Wow. Wow.
I've been there 3 times, Pearl Harbor, and you can see the oil coming
Yeah.
up. Yeah, it's very,
So what did you do here in Salem? I mean, you collected catalogs, and what about, I just learned about the grease from your frying pan. What did you had to save that grease for what? David, your mother did it.
Ammunition.
Yeah.
It was a component of the gunpowder.
For gunpowder. Is that right? For gunpowder.
we saved everything.
That's where string balls were started and rubber band balls and, right?
Right.
Okay.
Shoes were rationed.
Yeah. And there was somebody that told me they went around,
Yeah.
was it one of you here, and picked up the tin foil out of cigarette packages
Right.
that people would throw away? Is that right?
I saved everything.
Lucky
Any kind of
Strike Green is going to war. Do you remember that?
What's that?
Lucky Strike Green is going to war. It's the
Oh.
name of cigarettes.
I remember
And
that
they used to
ad.
advertise it on
Right.
the radio.
The original recycling.
You know that
We
there's
saved it anyway.
reports that people knew about the Japanese were going to do that. I think it came out of Britain, but there was talk that they knew the Japanese were going to do what they did.
Did they know they were going to do...
Anybody got any reports on that? Remember that?
My father said they
Yes.
could see the planes practicing for days before Pearl Harbor. And didn't really have anything that they could do about it as young enlisted
Yeah, but they weren't prepared.
men. No.
They weren't prepared. So I read an article just recently that they knew the Japanese were going to do something, but they thought it was going to be in Europe. But why? Why would they think that?
Yeah, but if they knew that, they should have taken them ships and scattered them.
Yes, yeah.
And the airplanes too.
Okay, I can tell you about that. I read about that quite a while ago. Roosevelt called all the ships that were in the Atlantic, or the Pacific, to Pearl Harbor. They were all there, but one captain of one of the ships would not cooperate, and he did not follow orders, and that was really the only ship that we had at the time, because it was a known fact that Roosevelt knew what he's talking about. It's a known fact. If you look it up, you'll find reading material about it, because I have read about it, and I'm pretty sure I'm right.
But why do you think that happened?
Why? Because they wanted war to make the economy get better. I feel as though that's why they did it. But it was sure a bad thing to do, to kill everybody that got killed from it. And
There's one thing that happened that we were kind of lucky in one respect. When Pearl Harbor was bombed, the aircraft carriers were at sea.
they were at sea.
They were at sea.
Well, that was different than what I read then. I didn't know there was a carrier at sea. Maybe
Yeah.
that's the guy that wouldn't bring his in. They claimed
Well, there
that
were several carriers.
they were all there but one. That's
They
what
were
I
at
read.
sea.
Yeah,
Well, they were
They were,
battleships,
thank
there's a
God,
difference,
they were
right?
yeah.
there.
I guess
So does that mean that they knew something was going to happen?
I don't know about that.
Well, I mean, if the carriers weren't there,
Well, there had to be some convalescence because, is that the word I wanted?
Reconnaissance?
Reconnaissance. Thanks.
Right.
I use my own words. But you got it, right?
We knew.
What do you mean?
There had to be some before the attack, or the Japanese wouldn't know to come. They came. I have a map of how the attack came and where each ship was located. I'll pass this around. And so they had to have done some reconnaissance to know that. But there's. If you go online today, I happen to use MSN as my homepage, but there's a commemoration of Pearl Harbor in 24 or 27 pictures, and one of those pictures, I swear, is the one that you have right in front of you. And the very last picture just brings tears to my eyes. It's a picture of a Japanese business in San Francisco with a huge sign that says, "We are American," because the day after, the Japanese were gathered and reconciled to the camps.
Wasn't there a blip or something on the radar that one young man reported to his superior, and they just ignored it? Ignored it. They didn't know what it was, and it was the first planes coming in.
Well, at the time, there was a sort of a squadron of B-17s coming to Pearl.
Yeah.
And they picked that up on the radar, and they thought it was that's what it was.
Okay.
And it was the Japanese coming in.
How many men would be on your ship?
2,900.
2,900. Oh, 2,900. Because I thought there'd be a lot more than 29.
On a carrier, 6,000.
Oh, boy.
And what ship were you on?
USS New York.
USS New York battleship.
Were we aware that Japan was the kind of enemy who would do that to this country? Were we aware of that?
Weren't they at war with China? Weren't they agitating China? Weren't they doing something?
Well, in the 30s, they came down and took over Shanghai and a number of cities, and the Chinese people called them monkeys. Which I think is true, but it's in a historical fiction book that I've read.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, I think that they were already at war, weren't they? Well, they were already taking over and growing their empire before us. So.
They had invaded China.
But what did your parents say? What did you hear your parents say?
What did my parents? Well, they were shocked. I mean,
I need to get that microphone to you.
I can't remember what they said. But
My dad said there was damn Japanese.
What's
My
that?
father said there was damn Japanese.
Could be, yeah.
There you go.
Remember that they
I don't remember actually what they said, but it was, they were just glued to the radio to, everybody was. It was.
Shirley Bush told me.
surprise,
I'll
yes.
tell you this. Shirley Bush told me, she couldn't come today, but she said she was maybe 4 years old or 6 years old, and she said that her older brother was called to go to war, and her father took him down to whatever the recruiting station, whatever it was that he had to go off. And she said when her father came, it was sad. She said when the whole family was, of course it was sad. But she said when he came back, she had never seen her father angry before, but he was so angry. She couldn't figure out why he was so angry, and it was because he wanted to go to war, and he was too old, and he wanted to go instead of his son. So, I mean, there was a lot of men that wanted to go off and could not go off to war. But she just remembered the anger, that she'd never seen him, and pounding his fist on the table. He was so angry that he couldn't go. So anyhow, any other stories? Nina, did we interrupt you? You were telling your story. Did we stop you? Did we interrupt you?
No, you didn't.
Do you remember what your mother's did? Or your father's? Did you guys save tires and go look for tires and stuff like that? And
We had a great big scrap pile, I mean really big, at Sebring Lincoln School at the time. Everybody brought all their scrap iron, and I mean there was truckloads that they got
Everything.
from around the area.
Right.
And they gave the money all to the kids in the school. I mean, and they took us on a trip to Washington D.C. on some of the money that we got from it. But I'll bet they had 30 or so semi-loads of scrap iron.
so where did that scrap iron go?
It went to Colca at Alliance. Colca.
Alliance?
Alliance bought it, and then it went to steel mills to be melted up for
Yeah, right.
war material.
Do you remember when they tore up the streetcar tracks and down?
Yeah, I do remember that. I remember the streetcar, but I don't remember the streetcar.
They tore
tracks.
up the tracks for the iron or the steel.
Yeah.
Is that what they did?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we were talking, David Stratton and I, about there was a commission that the president had started in February to regulate some of the government contracts. But when the war broke out, then manufacturers were, what would you say? They were ordered to stop doing production and going to making ammunition, which, do we not have some ammunition here of Mullins Manufacturing? So here we are as docents, and we're showing, we take people around, we show them the ammunition, the big, what do you
The
call them?
shells.
I call them bullets, but they're
The
bombs
shells.
or whatever. But I never was able to tell them why. The war effort, right? No, but would Mullins have been ordered to do that, or was it just maybe something they decided on their own?
Should have ordered. Should have been orders, I'm sure.
They were
orders
ordered.
made.
They were ordered to. Okay, so,
And the
and,
Red Cross did bandages.
what's
They
that?
stripped fabric and made bandages, the Red Cross volunteers in the area. They rolled bandages to send over.
The Red Cross did?
There's
So the
pictures
Red
of a
Cross
lot of
volunteers rolled bandages? So
They
you saved
they
material? and-
Saved material and stripped them and made rolls of for
Yeah.
bandages.
We had a couple cannons from the Civil War in Hope Cemetery, and they disappeared. But they're back, they were never melted down, and they're back at the cemetery, so I don't know how they got back. I was president out there for a few years.
Maybe it was just put on hold.
Yeah, but the
Yeah,
cannons are
just in case.
still, they're very valuable,
Yeah,
Somebody didn't want them melted down.
yeah.
apparently. Hopefully.
Dawn, do you know how many of those ships were like, well, what do I want to say? Wounded and maimed and whatever, and they were probably sunk, and then what'd they do, pull them up and then melt them down for scrap and make new ships? Is that what they did, made new ships? Or they fixed them?
It may be in that paper thing I mentioned today in the Salem
Yeah.
News. All the details are in that article today. How many ships were destroyed. And
We have that. What do you think, Gail? You were on a ship that wasn't, was it destroyed and then rebuilt?
No. What happened in New York, it was in an atomic bomb test,
Okay.
and it was so radioactive, they could not do a thing with it after that. So they took it out, bombed it, torpedoed it. They finally sunk it.
Where's
It's
it?
50 miles off of Pearl
Really?
in the deep.
Wow.
That's what happened to it.
Wow.
It's interesting.
Incidentally, you have a piece of Japanese plane. We were hit with a Japanese plane. Well, after things settled down, I went topside and I grabbed a hold of a piece of Japanese plane.
You might have given this to my dad.
Oh, it was
Right. You had big pieces.
And I've had it for years, but today I don't know what become of it. I can't find it.
Right here.
Well, how about standing in the ration lines? Joan, did you have to do that?
I'm sorry.
Did you stand in the ration lines? Did you
No,
stand
I
in
was
lines?
too young. But
Yeah, me
Well, how
too.
did you get the book? How'd you get the ration book?
Go to the rationing board. There was a
Yeah,
board
there was
that
a
was
board
designed
in town.
if you worked in a defense factory, you could get a C for buy a lot of gasoline to get to work in.
Right.
And if you were just a plain person, you'd get an A to put on your windshield. And then if you were a B, maybe you would have to be a student of some kind. It was the rationing board would recommend how many pounds of sugar you could get for how many kids and how much coffee you could get, and meat was rationed. And you had a stamp book. You'd pull the stamps out, give it to the grocer, and money.
Right.
So
Yeah.
where was the
Yeah,
ration?
I've got some ration books at home.
Can we have them?
I intend to give them to the Historical Society.
When you're done with it.
Where did you go to get it?
I don't know, I was 9 years
They
old.
had a ration board, I don't know.
I mean,
Draft board.
Was it in the
Did they-
memorial?
Because when I come home on leave a couple of times, I went to the draft board and they'd give me gas stamps.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you could
So-
run around.
Where would that have been in
Yes.
Salem, Ohio? A memorial building maybe?
Yes,
I'm thinking it was
Memorial Building.
Yeah.
Is that where the recruiters
What kind of
were,
sticker
too?
was it? Was it paper or?
Oh, no, it's about
Oh,
that
about
big.
like
And
that.
you just paste it on your windshield.
Paste it on.
the passenger side in the bottom corner,
I see.
on the windshield.
I was wondering how people
And
would
the
not
C
change
was
them.
red, and the one that was, B was black, and the A was white. So you didn't have to read it, you could tell by the color
Oh, that's
how many
interesting.
count. And then
Whatever
you'd get it.
happened to the board
And-
in front of the Memorial Building that listed all the
Veterans.
veterans that had died in the war? Do you remember that
Yeah.
being in front of the
Oh, yeah.
Memorial Building?
Yeah, David, do you know where it went? Do you know, David?
Some of these stories.
That's
are
kind
I
of a
believe
mystery.
Rumors over it,
Yes.
and we have pieces.
We have a piece or two of it over in the other building.
Good
It
citizen.
was
Oh,
taken
yeah,
down for some
absolutely.
reason.
And I'll
I
bet
don't think they understood the value and the importance of it.
that's
We have small pieces of some of the names, but
You have
not
small
the well,
pieces, sections,
panels.
panels of it.
And the Corsos, you know, they had these flags in their windows with the stars of how many boys they had in the service. And the Corsos had, and I wish I could remember how many they had, Corsos, wine
Of
shops.
course, those, they all went, yeah.
Yeah, but how many did they have that were in the service all at the same time? They had this flag in the window at their store, that all the stars of how many boys they had in the service, and I don't remember how many stars they had on that flag.
Is that the blue star?
They were blue stars.
Remember that?
And then
Yeah.
Corsos.
if they
the
were
gold mean?
killed, they
The
were
gold meant one that had passed away.
passed.
Yes, that's when you died, you'd
Yeah.
get a gold star. Your-
I remember I was on New York for 3 years. And a month after, the month before I was discharged off the ship, here come a guy down. He said, "Is there a Gale Paxson down there?" "Yeah." He said, "Well, I'm connected with the Ender Gross flower shop."
Oh,
And he was on, we were, the three of us were on board there for 3 years. Never knew it until it was discharged.
right.
Wow. Wow.
I have a list that my dad put in this report of the ships that were present, and I was really surprised at this. There were 8 battleships, several of them we've already...
Why didn't you use that
Right.
microphone?
Oh, there were 8 battleships, and several we've already listed: the California, the Pennsylvania, the Maryland, the Oklahoma, the West Virginia, the Arizona, the Nevada, and the Tennessee. There was 1 ex-battleship, there were 2 heavy cruisers, there were 6 light cruisers, there were 30 destroyers, 5 submarines, 2 repair ships, 9 mine layers, 10 mine sweepers, 2 cargo ships, 3 destroyer tenders, 1 submarine tender, 1 hospital ship, 6 seaplane tenders, 2 oilers, 2 gunboats, and several other tugs and smaller ships that were listed in this report.
How many carriers?
89 ships in all.
Weren't any carriers there?
No.
No,
Not a per,
no, I
they
didn't.
were
I
at
think
sea.
those carriers were in the Pacific, weren't they?
That map you passed around, a little bit at the bottom said there was 2 carriers. One was in California and one was out at sea somewhere.
Just like he said.
Yeah, right there in the bottom of that.
Yeah.
They weren't at Pearl, no.
The other carriers of the Pacific Fleet were the Enterprise en route to Pearl Harbor from Wake Island and Saratoga at Mare Island, California, undergoing major shipyard repairs. Japanese intelligence had not appraised their fleet of these changes, and the enemy thought he had sunk a carrier when the Utah went to the bottom.
Was the Hornet on there? The carrier Hornet?
No carriers.
No, the
I had a friend was on the aircraft carrier, the Hornet. There was 2 Hornets carriers, and when the first one was sunk, believe it or not, he never got his feet wet. The cruiser come alongside and was picking up men before it went to the bottom.
Wow.
Well, it certainly changed our country.
But that's the
Oh, it
Hornet?
sure did.
No doubt about it. No doubt about it. It was a
Here's the
horrible
Hornet.
day.
Huh. Want to pass it around, Tam?
So what you're saying is there were no aircraft carriers near,
Well,
so there's no
they
protection,
weren't at Pearl,
right?
though.
How could these pictures be taken? What kind of cameras do you suppose?
I have no idea.
Do you suppose he was a photographer?
No, he was not.
Well, because that's...
Somebody would have given those to him, I'm sure.
They had cameras, the sailors themselves had
Well,
cameras.
not only that, the services
but that's
have photographers, you know.
That takes a large camera to have a print that
What the
large.
heck is that?
Because you don't enlarge it. You know. Well, maybe you do.
The Hornet. Well, my husband had a 35 millimeter and he's got planes that's.
Oh, and you can enlarge from that, yeah, because there is something called an enlarger. Okay.
Yeah, and I don't know how his lens was, but,
There are people in the service that are designated to take
Just
pictures.
photographers,
I mean,
right.
photographers.
I mean, these are such good pictures.
Well, some of these are marked confidential, so I'm sure they were official
At
Yeah.
some point.
military photographers that took
Oh,
them.
yeah. Huh.
anybody else have anything? Okay, let me do this then. I want you to say one thing what you want to say to the next generation coming up about war.
Can I say something before that? I vowed that I would never buy a Japanese car. And to this day, at my age, I never bought one. But I don't know how people could have bought cars made in Japan after that Pearl Harbor.
What are the cars that are made in Japan?
A lot of them.
Toyota, the big one.
Honda?
Mitsubishi.
Yeah, but they have factories in this country, and they're made in this country.
Not at that time.
Yeah.
They were bringing them over in
Well, yeah, at the beginning,
cargo
yes.
ships.
Yeah, at the beginning, they were bringing them over.
Yeah.
Well, the 2 countries are very friendly now.
That's what I'm talking about in the beginning.
I
Yeah.
think we still have troops in Japan, don't we?
Oh, yes.
Sure.
That's my uncle.
And I think Japan and the United States are
He was on, in the
good friends.
Pacific Theater.
Well, that's the way it should be, too.
And my dream is that someday the whole world will be good friends.
Well, we gave Okinawa back. We rebuilt Okinawa, didn't we? And then we turned around and gave it back to them. So anyhow,
Well, we have the best way of having enemies and then giving them a lot of money
yeah,
afterwards.
really.
Yeah, right.
Who had these pictures, Barbara?
It was my uncle. He was a diver. He was in San Francisco and then was assigned to Pearl Harbor afterwards to help salvage.
And you don't know how he accumulated these?
Well, I don't know whether he got them through channels or whether he just, got them some other way.
You don't ask.
At least he had them.
Yeah, it is quite a treasure to have them.
Yeah.
It really is.
Unfortunately, I never really got to talk to him much to
Yeah.
find out. Of course, when you're a
So-
kid, you don't.
Historical Society's going to scan them all
Right.
and then give them back to you.
Right.
Right,
Good.
right.
Yeah, that's great.
So you guys that are veterans, so what do you think about North Korea right now? If I asked my dad, he would say, we're going to go to war. That's what my dad would say. He would always seem to know, a soldier seems to know these things. So what do you think?
Well,
I should get
I
that
don't
one.
know what
Here, I'll pass it over to
to
you.
think about
Did
it.
you reach it?
Yeah.
Yeah, we got it, thanks.
I don't think we better let him, the guy with the funny haircut. We shouldn't let him get away with anything.
No.
And I just hope that before he gets a wild idea of firing a missile
Yeah.
to the mainland of the U.S., we nail him.
Yep.
Yeah. I don't
He's
trust
scary.
them.
He's scary.
Don't
He
trust them.
really is.
Okay. Tell me what you predict. What do you think? What do
I'm
you-
too old to think.
When I was in Korea on the front lines, we were fighting the Chinese, the North Koreans, and the Russians were supplying the MiGs. We were really fighting three different countries.
Yeah.
And as long as the Chinese don't get involved and the Russians don't get involved, Kim Jong-un doesn't stand a chance.
Good, good.
He doesn't have a chance, but he's the meanest man I've ever listened to. And we keep aggravating him instead of trying to work something out. My dream is for a peaceful, wonderful world where we can live together and respect each other.
And we all want that.
The
We all
world
want
is
that.
one mess.
Yeah.
Yeah, we all want
The worst I remember in my lifetime.
Yeah. The whole world.
Well, we will when you go to heaven, Louis. Maybe I can get there too.
I don't intend to do that soon.
That's when it's gonna be peace.
That's the only true
Don't you
peace.
have a comment?
I'm a staunch Democrat. I'm not going to comment in the city of Salem. No. No.
Okay. Well, I would say watch them. I really don't trust them.
Oh, no, he's
No,
scary.
that's the way it is.
Yep, he's scary.
Diana?
He really is. As far as prediction, it wouldn't surprise me if we go
Yeah.
to war. Not surprised. You have a prediction, Mary Jean Alice?
I think there will be peace.
I certainly hope so.
You think there'll be peace?
I think there will be
I
peace.
agree with
Okay, how about you? Come on, this is my generation here. My generation.
Oh, I don't know. If you look back over history, there's been conflicts ever since you can remember. So I don't know that anything major will happen, but I don't think there'll ever be complete peace. That's just my opinion.
As long as two people disagree.
Yep.
Peace as we know it.
Yeah. Okay, anybody else have anything to add or tell us about, for,
Thank you. This was very
oh,
informative.
you're very welcome,
I
so.
really enjoyed it.
Yeah, so. What about recipes? Did your moms change your recipes and stuff?
Well, sugar was rationed. You didn't.
Now, how'd you do without sugar?
My mother did the cooking. I was too young, but
Well, you did
they
get
could.
some, but not
Yeah.
as much as you
You
wanted.
didn't get much.
You got
Wasn't
enough for
no.
your table. But,
Wasn't molasses
but you
used a
couldn't
lot?
can peaches and all that type of thing.
They could use
I mean,
honey.
there wasn't enough for them.
Right.
So how did that work when you couldn't can?
Well, you didn't have them. You just did without.
Kirby is my oldest brother.
That's
What
right,
about-
we just did without
Very close friends.
support if you didn't think about it.
Canning.
I don't remember.
What about the victory gardens?
Well, everybody had one.
Everybody, but didn't they already have a garden?
Kirby's
My dad had one. I don't think he ever had one until the war come along.
Is that right?
Kirby lives
So things were pretty good
Yeah.
before the war. I mean,
Nobody went hungry. Nobody went hungry, but you had to be particular what you ate.
And still were.
But I didn't go hungry. I ate good as far as, yeah, I do. I mean, I didn't know any better. Of course, I was born 2 weeks before the Depression was officially started. And everybody was poor. Nobody even knew they were poor because everybody was poor. I mean,
You're right.
I used to wear a shirt,
Frank when he was out.
29. I
29?
was born in August. In October was when the Depression was officially started.
Kirby
And
sent him now.
my dad owned a grocery store in Sebring at the time, and things were pretty tough then. I've seen my mother take milk, about this much, and put water to it, and they'll put it on the cereal. And I didn't know any different.
You know what happened to my dad?
What did he have?
He worked at Nolan,
Time he'd
Yeah.
go out to Albuquerque.
and they called him up to come to work.
Yeah.
So he went to work, and when he got there, they said, we don't really need you, you can go back home.
He kept telling me he was going to his.
And he went down there,
He did for a while.
and he gave him a check for 2 cents.
Oh, boy.
This was during the Depression. 2 cents.
Yeah. Well,
A check.
A check.
A check so they could prove they paid him. Oh my gosh.
My father made 87 cents an hour at Mullins for many, many years. But I went to college many years. There was never any money for me to go there. But there were cigarettes that they bought.
Well, Jim gets the paper. and he-
You handled this very nicely.
it was fun, so.
My dad has something in here about the Victory Gardens started in New Bedford, Massachusetts, and apparently got a lot of publicity in New Bedford. I don't know why.
They're called victory gardens.
cigarettes were the hardest thing for people to give up, though. I mean, cigarettes, they all went to the Army.
And I knew your mother.
And that's why they used to advertise Lucky Strike green. The package was green, has gone to war. You could get, I think it was a carton maybe every 2 months or every 2 weeks. And I know one time I found a pack of cigarettes. I found them because a guy had them in his shirt pocket. I figured that he went to put air in his tire and they fell out. And I went to get a bicycle air. And I put those cigarettes in my pocket and I rode as fast as I could to give them to my uncle because he was having fits. He couldn't get the cigarettes.
Everybody waiting for it.
What always got me, I think if I remember right, a carton of cigarettes, if we were at sea, 50 cents.
Well, when I was
But in port, $5.
When I was not in Korea, I was in England and Germany. But when we would go to the PX to get cigarettes, we could only get a carton and a half then. But they were only $1 a carton when I was in 50 and 54. But I didn't smoke, and I always sold mine on the black market. I could get $3.50 American money for a carton of cigarettes, and I paid $1. I mean, I had a good thing going there. I mean,
You declared all that, didn't you?
oh my God, I'm still declaring it.
How much
This
are
has
they a
been very
pack now?
interesting.
I don't know.
I've got
I don't
workers
smoke.
at my
A small
house,
pack.
my hot water tank went out.
Oh.
So, and we had an oil-fired hot water tank. Hardly anybody even knows that there is such a thing. But they're very
Yeah.
expensive to buy,
But they're good.
but they're very economical.
They're right.
But the costs of them now, I think we're putting in electric.
Okay.
There you go. Well, good luck.
Well, anyway, thank you very much for your
Yeah,
hosting
thank
the
you so
party.
much.
It was
Thank you.
very nice of
You know,
you.
we should, wait a minute, before you go, you know what, maybe we should do a prayer. Okay, Nina, Now, let's do a prayer real quick here. I'll just, you know, I tell my minister, I just do peanut butter and jelly prayers. So I just slap them together, you know, like a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. So anyhow, I just think it's Pearl Harbor Day. We just probably should commemorate and respect and that. So Heavenly Father, we thank you today for bringing these people together and having them share their knowledge and their memories with us. And we ask that you keep them in your prayers, keep them safe, and keep them happy. And we ask you to help us honor those that have died for us, for our freedom, and those that were maimed and in the process, and those that are still keeping us safe and keeping our freedom alive. So in Jesus' name, amen. Thank you.
Oh, thank you for doing that.
Thank you.
And please have refreshments.
Yes, we have cookies and coffee, and if you want to talk and share more information if you can.
You were in a lot of Korea, weren't you, Tom?
I wanted to go
You were in a lot of action. I was in during
Find out what
when I was in England.
I didn't have time to read that article. I did email
No, I didn't. We never got it either, but I called the Salem News and got some coffee.